My husband signed the consent form to withdraw my life support. He did it with a steady hand, I imagine. The doctors told him there was still hope, a chance. But when I suddenly woke up, the first words I whispered made the doctor turn pale and immediately call the police. Before the story begins, please write in the comments section where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe so this channel can grow and bring you even more compelling stories. Darkness, that was all I could see, as far as my mind could reach. It felt like drowning at the bottom of the deepest ocean, where sunlight never touched. My body was heavy, as if 1,000 tons of concrete were crushing my chest, my legs, my arms. I wanted to move. I wanted to scream, but not a single muscle would obey my brain's command. I was trapped, a prisoner in my own flesh. However, my hearing was incredibly sharp, sharper than when I was fully conscious. I could hear the hum of the ventilator pumping air into my lungs with a monotonous, frightening rhythm. Beep, beep, beep. The sound of the heart monitor became the only sign that I was still alive, that my soul had not yet left this helpless body. "How is she, Dr. Miller?" That voice, my blood boiled instantly upon hearing it. It was Ethan, my husband. His tone was so sad, so fragile, as if he were the most suffering husband in the world about to lose his beloved wife. But I knew exactly what kind of demonic grin he was likely hiding behind that pathetic face. "Her vitals are stable, Mr. Hayes. Although Dr. Reed is still in a coma," Dr. Miller replied, "my colleague here at Chicago General." Dr. Miller's voice sounded tired yet firm. I could imagine the furrows on his brow as he checked the graphs on the monitor. "As I mentioned yesterday, there's a chance we can perform a decompressive craniectomy to reduce the pressure on her brain. Her pupil response is still there, though weak." "This is hope, sir." I wanted to scream. "Yes, do the surgery. Mark, help me." But my tongue was tied. My throat felt like it was stuffed with thick cotton. I screamed as hard as I could inside my head, but no sound came out, only torturous silence. "Surgery." Ethan let out a long sigh, a sigh that sounded so fabricated to my ears. "Dr. Miller, we've been over this. Evelyn, my wife, has suffered enough. I can't bear to see her head cut open again, with tubes stuck in her everywhere. Is there a 100% guarantee she'll be back to normal?" "In medicine, there are no 100% guarantees, Mr. Hayes, but without the surgery, the risk is fatal. We're racing against time," Mark urged. I could hear the frustration in his voice. Mark was a great doctor. He knew I could be saved. He knew I was a fighter. "No, doctor," Ethan cut him off quickly. His tone turned slightly colder, but he quickly masked it with a fake sob. "I know my wife. She's a perfectionist. She wouldn't want to live as a vegetable, burdening others for the rest of her life. Besides, in our family, we have a belief. It's wrong to force our will against God's plan. If it's Evelyn's time to go home, I have to let her go." "Liar," I screamed in my mind. "You're just afraid I'll wake up and expose everything." "Ethan, you're afraid I'll tell the police that you pushed me down the stairs. You're afraid your gambling debts will be revealed." I remembered the incident with perfect clarity, as if it had just happened 5 minutes ago. That night, a heavy rain poured over Chicago. Just like the sound of the rain, I could now faintly hear tapping against the window of my hospital room. We had a huge fight on the second floor of our luxurious suburban home. I had just discovered suspicious bank statements. The money in our daughter Lily's college fund was gone. Hundreds of thousands of dollars vanished overnight. When I confronted him, Ethan, who usually appeared dapper and gentle in public, turned into a monster. His handsome face, which people had always praised as the ideal husband's, turned red with rage. He was no longer the Ethan I knew. He was a cornered addict. "Stay out of my business, Evelyn. You're just a wife. Your job is to stay quiet and make money," he had yelled. "That's Lily's future, Ethan." "What did you use it for? Online poker again? Your bad stock investments?" I yelled back. He didn't answer with words, but with a hard shove. I lost my balance. My body was airborne for a moment before my back hit the stairs, and my head struck the cold marble with a horrifying crack. The last thing I remembered before darkness swallowed me was Ethan standing at the top of the stairs, looking at me not with remorse, but with a calculating stare. He didn't help me right away. He stood there, waiting, making sure whether I was still breathing or not. And now he was standing by my bed, playing the role of a grieving husband. "Mr. Hayes, I beg you to reconsider. As Dr. Reed's colleague, I know she's a strong woman." "She would want to fight," Mark pleaded again. I could feel Mark's warm hand touch my wrist, checking my pulse. The touch gave me a little comfort in the midst of this cold despair. "Enough, doctor." Ethan's voice rose, then lowered again, as if trying to control his emotions. "I am her husband. I have the right to decide. I've discussed this with my mother, and we've agreed that we don't want Evelyn to suffer any longer. Please, respect our family's decision. Just pull the plug." Pull the plug. The sentence echoed in my head like a death sentence. He wanted to kill me legally. He wanted to finish what he failed to do on the stairs. I sensed another person in the room. A pungent perfume, the overly strong scent of jasmine. It was my mother-in-law, Mrs. Hayes. "Doctor." Mrs. Hayes's voice was sharp and piercing. "My son is right. It's Evelyn's fate to be this way. Perhaps this is a warning because she was too busy working and forgot her duties as a wife. Don't prolong my son's suffering. Having to go back and forth to the hospital to look after a wife with no hope. Just let her go." My heart shattered into a million pieces. Not just my husband, but my mother-in-law also wanted me dead. They were conspiring. In their eyes, I was not a human being. I was just a walking ATM that was now broken and had to be thrown away. "Very well." Mark's voice sounded defeated. My heart sank. "If that is the final decision of the family, and you have signed the Do Not Resuscitate DNR forms, we cannot force the surgery. 1, 2, 3. We will proceed with the extubation procedure, the removal of the breathing tube, as you've requested." "When can it be done?" Ethan asked. There was a hint of impatience in his voice. He was in a hurry. "We can prepare now." "Nurse Sarah will get the procedure ready," Mark answered softly. "No, not now. God, please help me. I don't want to die yet. I have to save Lily. I have to save my assets from these leeches. I have to tell the world who Ethan really is." I mustered all my strength. I focused on the tip of my toes, on my eyelids, on anything that could be moved. "Move, Evelyn, move," I commanded my own body. But it was useless. My body remained still, like a lifeless piece of meat. A coldness crept up from my feet. Not the cold of the room temperature, but the cold of fear of the approaching death. I heard footsteps approaching. The smell of Ethan's expensive cologne mixed with the faint smell of cigarettes wafted near my face. He leaned down, bringing his lips to my ear. "I'm sorry, darling," he whispered so softly that I was sure Mark and Nurse Sarah couldn't hear him. "When you die, my debts will be paid off with your insurance money. You're useful after all." Those words set my soul on fire. An incredible rage erupted in my chest. Hotter than fire, stronger than fear. He wanted to kill me for insurance money. 4, 5, 6. He called me useful only if I died. Bastard. That anger triggered something in my brain. Adrenaline flooded my dormant nervous system. My heart began to race. Beep, 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 beep. My heart monitor started beeping faster. "Doctor, the patient's heart rate is increasing," Nurse Sarah exclaimed. "Evelyn," Mark called out. In that darkness, I fought. I clawed at the walls of this paralysis with the nails of my fury. I would not die today. Not at the hands of this man. The accelerating sound of the heart monitor became the soundtrack to my struggle. Beep, beep, beep. Its rhythm was chaotic, matching the explosive turmoil in my chest. I was no longer a passive patient. I was a cornered tigress, ready to pounce on anyone who threatened her life. "What's wrong with it? Why is it making that sound?" Ethan's voice was panicked. Not panicked with worry, but with fear. He was afraid his plan would fall apart at the last second. "This is a physiological response," Dr. Miller explained. His voice sounded closer. I felt his hands checking my eyelids, shining a medical penlight into my pupils. A blinding light pierced the darkness. Painful, but at the same time, hopeful. There's a sudden surge in brain activity. Doctor, Reed might be feeling pain or a strong emotion. What emotion? She's in a coma, Mrs. Hayes snapped. Her voice was shrill with dislike. Come on, doctor. Don't give us false hope. Just pull the plug now so she can be at peace. We cannot perform the procedure when the patient's condition is unstable. Ma'am. Nurse Sarah stated firmly. I recognized my friend's voice. Sarah, thank you for defending me. I focused all my remaining energy on one point. My eyes. My eyelids felt as heavy as iron, glued shut by an invisible superglue. But I didn't care. The hatred for Ethan and Mrs. Hayes was a fuel far more potent than any stimulant. I imagined Lily's face, my little daughter who still needed her mother. If I died now, Lily would be raised by these monsters. Ethan would spend my inheritance on gambling, and Lily would be neglected. No, that couldn't happen. Open. Open your eyes, Evelyn. With a single breath that felt like it tore my chest apart, I forced my eyelid muscles to work. Little by little, the white light of the ICU room began to seep in. Blurry, glaring. Everything seemed shadowy and out of focus. Doctor, look! Nurse Sarah cried out. I blinked once. Twice. The shadows in front of me began to sharpen. A face. Mark's worried face was right above mine. Behind him stood Nurse Sarah with her hand over her mouth, her eyes glistening with tears. And in the corner, I saw them. Ethan and Mrs. Hayes. Ethan's face turned pale instantly, as white as a shroud. His eyes widened as if he had seen a ghost rise from the grave. He took an unconscious step back, bumping into the IV pole, causing it to sway. His mouth hung open, but no sound came out. The mask of the grieving husband he had been wearing crumbled, replaced by an expression of pure horror. He knew I had heard his last whisper. Mrs. Hayes stood frozen, her hands clutching her expensive leather bag tightly. The old woman's face tensed. Her lips were pressed into a thin line of displeasure. Evelyn, can you hear me? Mark asked. His voice trembled with emotion. He brought his face closer. I tried to answer, but my throat was parched. There was a ventilator tube stuck in my mouth, making me want to gag. It was painful. I could only manage a weak groan. Ugh. Easy, Evelyn, easy. You're still on the ventilator. Don't fight the machine, Mark instructed gently. He looked at Sarah. Prepare for ventilator weaning. She's fully conscious. We'll try to extubate now, if her spontaneous breathing is adequate. Ethan suddenly stepped forward, trying to regain control despite the fear still etched on his face. Wait, doctor, is she really conscious? Or is this just a reflex before she passes? I've heard old folks talk about the last flicker of a candle before it goes out, right? How cruel your words are, Ethan. Even when I open my eyes, you still wish for my death. Mark turned to Ethan with a sharp gaze I had never seen before. Mr. Hayes, your wife opened her eyes and made direct eye contact. This is not a reflex, this is consciousness. The process of removing the ventilator tube was excruciating. It felt like a long snake being pulled out of my lungs. I coughed violently. My chest felt like it was on fire. Tears streamed from the corners of my eyes. Nurse Sarah swiftly cleaned the mucus from my mouth and placed an oxygen mask on my face. Breathe, Evelyn. Slowly, Mark guided me. I greedily inhaled the pure oxygen. My lungs ached. But that pain was proof that I was alive. I stared at Ethan intently, a look that sent a clear message. The war has just begun. Ethan looked restless. He fumbled in his pants pocket, perhaps looking for his phone or a cigarette, or just an escape. Honey. I'm so glad you're awake, he said, his tone sounding off-key. He tried to approach and hold my hand. I weakly jerked my hand away, rejecting his touch. Disgusted. His skin felt like poison. Evelyn? Ethan looked shocked by my rejection. I looked at Mark. I had to tell him now, before Ethan had a chance to manipulate the situation or hurt me again when no one was around. My voice was hoarse, barely a whisper, like sandpaper rubbing together. Doctor, I called out with great effort. Mark immediately leaned his ear close to my lips. Yes, Evelyn. Tell me slowly. What hurts? I gathered my last remaining breath. I glanced at Ethan, who was watching me warily. He moved closer, trying to eavesdrop. Keep him away, I hissed, glancing at Ethan. Mark understood. He raised his hand, gesturing for Ethan to back away. Please give us some space, sir. Ethan reluctantly stepped back, his eyes never leaving me. Cold sweat started to bead on his temples. I grabbed the collar of Mark's uniform, pulling him closer. So close that only he could hear my whisper. This was the key to Ethan's downfall. This was my real-life insurance. Phone, I whispered, my voice faltering. In locker 303. Doctor's lounge. Mark frowned, confused but listening intently. Code. I swallowed hard. My throat was so sore. His mother's death date. I glanced at Ethan. He didn't know his own mother's death date because he didn't care, but he used that date as his ATM pin because it was the only date he ever recorded in his father's diary, the day he received his first inheritance. Ironic. Mark froze. He slowly pulled his face back and looked deep into my eyes. He saw the seriousness and fear there. He was a neurosurgeon. He was intelligent. He immediately realized this was not the rambling of a post-coma patient. This was an emergency message. Mark's face, which had been full of medical concern, turned pale. He understood the implications of my words. A hidden phone, a secret code, a patient's fear of her own husband. Mark straightened up, trying to act professional even though his hands were shaking slightly. He looked at Ethan with a gaze now full of suspicion. Nurse Sarah, Mark called out, his voice deliberately flat. Please watch over Dr. Reed. Don't let anyone near her, including family, without my permission. I need to get a special medication from the pharmacy for a moment. But doctor, I'm her husband, Ethan protested, his tone rising in panic. Post-coma observation protocol? Sir, Mark lied smoothly. The patient needs absolute quiet, or she could have a seizure. He patted Nurse Sarah's shoulder, giving her a look that only those who had worked together for years would understand. Protect her. Mark turned and walked quickly out of the ICU. I saw him reach into his white coat pocket, pulling out his own phone. His fingers danced quickly across the screen. He wasn't calling the pharmacy. I knew he was calling someone far more important right now. The police. Ethan watched Mark's departure anxiously. Then his eyes turned back to me. The look was no longer one of love or grief, but that of a wild animal realizing its prey has just escaped its grasp, and now the hunter has become the hunted. I smiled faintly behind my oxygen mask. You're finished, Ethan. The atmosphere in the room suddenly became silent, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the silence before a storm, as dense as the air heavy with black clouds before lightning strikes. After Dr. Miller's back disappeared behind the door, the tension in the room multiplied. I was still lying weak. Half of my life seemingly just forcibly pulled from the grave, while the other half was still fighting to stay grounded in the real world. Nurse Sarah stood tall beside my bed, her position defensive. She was not just a nurse to me at this moment. She was the last fortress protecting me from the two predators standing not far from the foot of my bed. Ethan and his stepmother, Mrs. Hayes. Yes, Mrs. Hayes was Ethan's stepmother, the woman who married Ethan's father for his wealth and raised Ethan to be a man who worshipped material things. They both stared at me, Ethan with an unconcealable restlessness, his foot tapping nervously on the hospital's vinyl floor in a fast, annoying rhythm. His wild eyes swept the room, occasionally glancing at the door where Mark had exited, then back at me with a look that was hard to decipher. A mixture of fear and deep hatred. Why is Dr. Miller taking so long? Ethan grumbled, breaking the silence. His voice sounded hoarse. He glanced at his fake Rolex, a high-end counterfeit he bought to deceive his business clients. He's just getting medication from the pharmacy. It should only take 5 minutes. Maybe there's a line. Sir, the central pharmacy is busy because of the storm victims, Nurse Sarah answered calmly, though I could see her hands were clenched tightly at her sides. Sarah knew something was wrong. Sarah knew Mark hadn't gone to the pharmacy. I tried to regulate my breathing behind the oxygen mask. Every breath felt like inhaling razor blades, sharp and painful. But this pain kept me conscious. My mind drifted to the phone, an old beat-up phone I had hidden 3 months ago. At that time, I had already sensed Ethan's rotten scheme. The money in our joint account started disappearing little by little. Then the bruises on my body began to appear, always in places covered by clothing. Ethan was very clever in his abuse. He never hit my face, because I was a doctor who had to meet patients. He hit my upper arms, thighs, or stomach. The parts I could hide behind my proud white coat. I bought that used phone at a small shop on the outskirts of Chicago, using cash to avoid a paper trail. That's where I stored everything. Recordings of our fights, photos of the bruises I secretly took in the hospital bathroom, and a video of Ethan's confession when he was drunk. The video where he boasted about the insurance plan. I hid it in locker 303, a rarely used residence locker, because the lock was jammed and it was located in a damp corner. Only I knew how to open it with a little trick. "I'm going out for a minute," Ethan said suddenly, walking towards the door. My heart felt like it stopped. Did he know? Could he guess? Ethan was cunning. His criminal instincts were sharp. If he followed Mark and found him not at the pharmacy, he would know I had leaked something. He might do something desperate. "I'm sorry, Mr. Hayes." Sarah's voice was sharp, stopping Ethan in his tracks. "Dr. Miller instructed that you remain here. We need the family's immediate consent if Dr. Reed's condition worsens." Ethan turned, his face flushed. "I need a smoke. I'm stressed seeing my wife like this. Who are you to stop me? You're just a nurse." "I am following the instructions of the attending physician," Sarah retorted fiercely. "And there is a corridor sterilization procedure underway due to an infectious patient. You are not allowed to leave for the next 10 minutes. That was a lie. Sarah was lying to hold him. I wanted to thank her, but I could only blink weakly. Mrs. Hayes snorted. She walked towards my bed. The sickeningly sweet scent of her jasmine perfume made me nauseous. She looked at me with a condescending gaze, as if I were dirt on her expensive shoes. "You see what you've done, Evelyn?" Mrs. Hayes hissed softly, but clearly enough to be heard. "You're troubling everyone. If you were a good wife, you wouldn't have stressed your husband like this. You should have just died peacefully earlier." Tears of anger welled up in my eyes. This woman, she knew how depraved her stepson was, but she turned a blind eye for the monthly allowance Ethan gave her, money that was actually stolen from my savings. Suddenly, Ethan seemed to realize something. His eyes widened. He looked at me, then at the door. His face turned deathly pale. Maybe he remembered that I had once caught him rummaging through my bag looking for evidence. Maybe he realized that my earlier whisper wasn't just a complaint of pain. "Move!" Ethan pushed Sarah's shoulder roughly, causing my friend to stumble into a medicine trolley. The sound of clashing metal broke the tension. "Sir, don't be rough!" Sarah shouted. "You're hiding something," Ethan yelled, his panic peaking. "What did you tell him, Evelyn?" "What?" Ethan lunged towards me, his large hands gripping the bedrail. His enraged face was just inches from mine. The smell of cigarettes and cold sweat emanated from him. I saw a murderer in his eyes. He wanted to strangle me. He wanted to silence me forever before the police arrived. "Answer me!" he yelled, shaking the bedrail. My heart monitor blared as my heart rate skyrocketed. "Beep, beep, beep, beep. Security!" Sarah screamed at the top of her lungs, pressing the emergency button on the wall. Ethan panicked. He knew his time was up. He released his grip on the bed and ran towards the exit. He had to stop whatever Mark was doing. He had to erase the evidence. However, as the automatic door slid open, Ethan's steps came to an abrupt halt. In the doorway, 2 burly security guards were already blocking his path, and behind them, panting but with a triumphant look on his face, stood Dr. Miller. In his hand, he held an object that made Ethan's knees go weak. A battered black phone with a cracked screen. My Pandora's box. The rain outside raged, furiously beating against the ICU window, in sync with the storm now erupting inside the room. Lightning flashed, illuminating Ethan's face, now as white as paper. He took a step back, his legs unsteady as if his bones had just been pulled out one by one. Dr. Miller walked in, followed by 2 men in plain clothes whose aura of authority was palpable. Detectives. Mark didn't look at Ethan. He walked straight to me, placing the old phone on the bedside table as if presenting a trophy. The phone was enclosed in a clear plastic bag, a medical sample bag to preserve fingerprints. What is the meaning of this? Mrs. Hayes's shrill voice broke the tense silence. She tried to maintain her arrogance, though her eyes betrayed panic. Why are you stopping my son? And what is that piece of junk? One of the detectives, a middle-aged man in a rain-dampened brown leather jacket, stepped forward. I'm Detective Harrison. Mr. Ethan Hayes. His voice was deep and firm. We've received a report of alleged attempted murder and domestic violence. Please remain where you are. Slander, Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. Beads of sweat the size of corn kernels streamed down his temples. This must be my wife's doing. She's crazy, sir. She's hallucinating from the coma. The drugs have damaged her brain. Mark looked at Ethan coldly. Dr. Reed's brain is functioning perfectly, Mr. Hayes. Well enough to remember the passcode to this phone. Mark picked up the phone, still in its plastic bag, and turned it on. The screen lit up dimly, displaying the password entry field. Your birth mother's death date, Mark said flatly. Ethan was silent. He swallowed hard. It was his little secret. His birth mother died of a serious illness because they couldn't afford treatment, long before his father became wealthy and married Mrs. Hayes. Ethan had always blamed poverty for his mother's death, which was why he was so obsessed with money. And that date, ironically, he used as the code for all his criminal activities, a twisted reminder of why he did all this. Mark typed in the numbers. The 5th of April 2098. Click. The phone unlocked. The small beep as the lock opened sounded like a bomb exploding in Ethan's ears. Mark tapped the screen a few times, opened a folder named Evidence, and then connected the phone to a small portable speaker he had brought with him. Let's have a listen, Mark said. The first audio played. A rustling sound was heard, then Ethan's clear and distinct voice filled the ICU. Sign it or die, Evelyn. Sign this asset transfer form now. Then the sound of a loud slap and my muffled cry. If you die, I get the insurance money. $5 million, Evelyn. That's more than enough to pay off my gambling debts and live happily with Mom. So which will it be? Die slowly or sign now? Mrs. Hayes's face was ashen. She covered her mouth, her eyes wide as she stared at the old phone. The evidence was irrefutable. Ethan's voice, his malicious tone, the mention of Mom, it was all laid bare. That's a deepfake, Ethan tried to deny, but his voice had no strength left. He slowly backed towards the window, his wild eyes searching for an impossible escape. We're in the age of AI. That must be a fabricated voice. Evelyn is a neurosurgeon. She's smart. She must have set me up. Fabricated? Mark raised an eyebrow. He tapped the screen again. What about this video? The video played. The small phone screen was aimed so the detectives could see. It was a video I had secretly recorded from a crack in the closet while Ethan was on the phone with someone, likely his bookie. In the video, Ethan was pacing, his face furious. Don't worry, boss. My wife is taken care of. The stairs at home are slippery when wet. Just a little push. Done. A domestic accident. The cops won't suspect a thing. The money will come through next week. I promise. The video ended. Silence. Only the steady beep of my heart monitor served as a silent witness to the downfall of a monster. Detective Harrison signaled to his partner. Cuff him. Wait. No. Mom, help me, Ethan. Ethan screamed hysterically as the police apprehended him. He struggled, kicking like a child having a tantrum. This is a misunderstanding. Evelyn is the crazy one. She fell on her own. You have the right to remain silent, the officer said, twisting Ethan's arm behind his back. The click of the metal handcuffs locking his wrists sounded more beautiful than any symphony I had ever heard. Ethan was dragged past my bed. His eyes met mine. There was no arrogance left, only pure terror. I looked him straight in the eye. Then, with the last of my strength, I slowly raised my right hand. My finger moved weakly, pointing towards the door. Go! You're a devil, Evelyn! A devil! Ethan screamed as he was dragged out the door. His voice echoed down the hospital corridor before finally fading away. Mrs. Hayes still stood frozen. She looked at me, Then at the door where her stepson had been taken, without saying a word, without an apology, without remorse, she turned and walked quickly out of the room. The sound of her heels was arrogant yet empty. She chose to save her own reputation rather than defend the son who had just been proven a criminal. My body suddenly felt limp. The adrenaline that had sustained me vanished, replaced by an overwhelming exhaustion. My vision started to blur again, but this time it wasn't because of the coma. "It's over, Evelyn. It's over," Mark's gentle voice was in my ear. He held my hand tightly. "You're safe now. Ethan can't touch you anymore." Sarah was sobbing at the end of the bed, holding my feet. "I'm so sorry, Ev. I had no idea you were going through this alone all this time." I wanted to smile, but my facial muscles were too tired. I just closed my eyes, letting the tears fall onto the pillow. The rain outside was still heavy, but the storm in my life had just subsided. However, I knew this wasn't really over. The storm of slander would soon come, but at least tonight, I was still alive. I had won. The echo of Ethan's scream, calling me a devil, slowly faded down the long, cold hospital corridor. But its vibration lingered in the air, hanging like poisonous smoke in the now silent ICU room. His being dragged away by the police, handcuffed, should have brought me immense relief. I should have felt free. But what I felt at that moment was a painful emptiness, as if all my bones had been forcibly pulled out along with the man I once considered the final harbor of my life. My body finally gave up. The adrenaline that had burned through my blood, forcing me to stay conscious and fight, was now extinguished. The monitor beside me started beeping with a warning tone again, not because my heart had stopped, but because its rhythm had become very weak and irregular. "Evelyn, stay with me, Evelyn." Dr. Miller's voice sounded distant, as if he were calling me from the end of a tunnel. I felt medical hands working quickly on my body. Nurse Sarah injected something into my IV line. A cold sensation spread through my veins, then slowly through my entire body, bringing with it a heavy drowsiness, but I refused to close my eyes. There was one more thing left unfinished. One more life was at stake in this deadly chess game. "Lily," I whispered, my voice barely audible under the refitted oxygen mask. "Where's my daughter?" Mark, who was checking my pupil response, paused. His tense face slowly softened. He held my hand, not as a doctor, but as a friend who understood a mother's greatest fear. "Lily is safe, Ev. She's at my parents' house for now, with my mom and her babysitter," Mark answered gently. "I picked her up quietly yesterday afternoon, as soon as I became suspicious of Ethan trying to rush your life support removal. He doesn't know she's there." Tears streamed from the corners of my eyes, wetting the pillow. Thank God. Lily was safe. Ethan couldn't use her as a pawn. That monster couldn't touch my little girl. Detective Harrison, the officer who had arrested Ethan, approached. He looked awkward in the midst of the intense medical situation, but his duty demanded firmness. He held the plastic bag containing the old phone, my only weapon. "Dr. Reed," Detective Harrison said carefully, "I know you need to rest, but I need a brief verbal confirmation to officially secure this evidence. Is it correct that this phone belongs to you and contains evidence of threats from Mr. Hayes?" I nodded weakly. "Yes, that's the evidence." "All right, we'll process it. Mr. Hayes will be detained tonight on charges of attempted murder and domestic violence. You should rest. A full statement can be taken when your condition improves." After the detective left, the atmosphere in the room changed. It was no longer criminal tension, but the emotional debris of a storm. Nurse Sarah was arranging my blanket with trembling hands. I could see my friend's eyes were swollen. She must have been holding back tears all this time, trying to be strong in front of Ethan. "I was so scared earlier, Ev." Sarah's sobs finally broke. She hugged my blanket-covered legs. "I thought Ethan was going to strangle you right in front of us. His eyes, they were like a man possessed." "That's enough, Sarah. Let's not talk about it now." "Let Evelyn sleep," Mark gently chided, though I knew he was still shaken too. The news of Ethan's arrest spread like wildfire. Even in my semi-conscious state, I could feel the change in the gazes of the night shift nurses who came in to check my IV. There were looks of pity, shock, and whispers I accidentally overheard when the door opened slightly. Crazy, right? Dr. Reed's husband is like that, and he's so handsome, always treated us to coffee. His debts are in the millions, they say. Online gambling. A wave of shame washed over me. All this time, I had built an image of a successful neurosurgeon, a career woman with a harmonious family. I covered every bruise with thick foundation and long-sleeved shirts. I covered every one of Ethan's debts with my salary and bonuses. I built a beautiful sandcastle so people wouldn't see the hell I was actually living in. And tonight, that sandcastle had crumbled, swept away by the brutal wave of truth. Everyone now knew Dr. Reed wasn't a perfect woman. She was a battered victim. "Ev," Mark called again. He sat in the chair beside my bed, looking at me with deep eyes. The rain outside was starting to subside, leaving a drizzle that tapped against the window with a slow rhythm. "You don't need to think about what people are saying. Just focus on recovering. We still have a long way to go." Ethan and his mother won't stay quiet. I looked at Mark. There was a real weariness on his face. He had risked his career tonight, faking a reason to go to the pharmacy, calling the police without going through the hospital's convoluted bureaucracy, and hiding my child. He did all of that for me. "Thank you," I said sincerely. Mark smiled faintly, a smile he rarely showed at the hospital. "Sleep, Evelyn. Tomorrow is a new day, and this time, you're not alone." The sedative finally won. My consciousness was slowly pulled into a dark but peaceful dream world. No more pain, no more of Ethan's screams, just peaceful darkness. For the first time in 3 days, I slept not because of a coma induced by blunt force trauma, but because my body knew the threat was gone. However, deep in my heart, my instincts whispered that this was just the intermission of the first act. The real war, the war against public opinion and legal trickery, was just about to begin. 2 weeks had passed since that night. I had been moved from the ICU to a VIP private room. My body was recovering at an astonishing rate, at least physically. The bruises on my body were fading to a yellowish hue, and the stitches on my head had dried. But the invisible wounds were severely inflamed. That morning, the bright Chicago sun pierced through the window blinds of my hospital room. It should have been a bright day, but my mood was dark and heavy. On my lap lay a tablet that Nurse Sarah had reluctantly lent me. At first, she refused, but I insisted. I needed to know what was happening out there. I couldn't fight with my eyes closed, and what I saw on that screen made my blood boil. A viral video on social media with millions of views. The thumbnail featured the face of Mrs. Hayes, Ethan's stepmother, crying her eyes out against the backdrop of their luxurious house, a house built with my sweat. The title was provocative. A Mother's Heartbreak. Wealthy doctor frames husband for her lover. My hand trembled as I pressed play. In the video, Mrs. Hayes appeared in simple clothes, a stark contrast to her usual glamorous style, and without makeup to look more miserable. "My son, Ethan, is a very patient husband," she sobbed in front of the camera, wiping away her crocodile tears with a tissue. "He was laid off, but he always tried to make his wife happy. But what did he get in return? Evelyn, my daughter-in-law. She was cheating on him with a colleague, another doctor. When Ethan confronted her, Evelyn got angry and fell down the stairs in a hysterical fit. Now she's twisting the facts. She and her lover framed my son so they could be together. Oh God, where is the justice?" The video was dramatically edited, complete with heart-wrenching, sad music. And the worst part was the comments section. Thousands of comments from netizens who knew nothing, judging me with words sharper than a scalpel. "What an ungrateful woman. She has a handsome husband and still cheats. No wonder her husband is in jail. That doctor boyfriend must have helped frame him. Check his bank account. Boycott the hospital where she works. Unethical doctor. Poor mother. A mother's tears are sacred. That Evelyn will get her karma." I threw the tablet to the end of the bed. I felt suffocated. My chest hurt, not because of my lungs, but because of the vicious slander that was now stripping me bare in front of the entire country. They didn't know Ethan beat me. They didn't know he spent my savings on gambling. They only saw the drama, and Mrs. Hayes was a far more skilled actress than I was. She knew our society was easily moved by the tears of an elderly person, regardless of the facts. The door to the room opened. Dr. Miller came in, carrying a tray with oatmeal and a glass of water. His face looked fresher today, but his smile faded as soon as he saw the expression on my face and the carelessly tossed tablet. "You watched it," Mark stated flatly. "It wasn't a question." "How can I be calm, Mark?" My voice rose, tears of frustration spilling out. "Look at what they're saying. They're saying I'm having an affair with you. They're saying Ethan is innocent. Mrs. Hayes is twisting everything. My career, my reputation, it's all ruined." Mark placed the tray on the table and pulled a chair closer. He didn't try to soothe me with empty, sweet words. He looked at me sharply, his eyes full of determination. "Listen to me, Evelyn. This is a classic strategy," Mark said calmly. "Ethan's lawyer must have told Mrs. Hayes to do this. It's called trial by media. They know our legal evidence is strong, the voice recording, the video, the medical report, so they can't win in court. Their only way to fight back is to destroy your mental state through public opinion. They want you to get depressed and withdraw the report or appear mentally unstable in front of the judge. But this hurts, Mark. They're insulting us. Let them bark. We have a fatal bite." Mark took out his own phone. "The forensic team has successfully recovered data from Ethan's laptop that was seized from your house yesterday. You know what they found? A chat history between Ethan and a woman named Cindy. She's Ethan's real mistress. And guess what? Cindy is 4 months pregnant." My world stopped for a moment. Pregnant. My voice caught in my throat. "So, besides gambling, he also—" "Yes, the money you thought was lost to gambling. A large part of it flowed to Cindy's apartment in downtown Chicago," Mark continued. "The police also found evidence of a transfer from Ethan's account to an online gambling site on the very day you fell down the stairs. The motive is clear. He needed your life insurance money to cover his gambling debts and the living expenses of his mistress." The news hit me like a sledgehammer. But strangely, this time it didn't hurt. It was a relief. This was ammunition. This was proof that I wasn't crazy. "We'll save this ace for the trial," Mark said. "Let Mrs. Hayes run her mouth now. The higher she flies with her lies, the harder she'll fall when we expose everything." Suddenly, the door opened again. This time, a small figure ran in with cheerful steps that instantly changed the gloomy atmosphere of the room. "Mommy!" Lily, my little daughter. She jumped into my arms without hesitation, burying her face in my neck. The scent of her hair, the familiar baby powder smell, instantly washed away the stench of medicine and the filth of online slander. I held her tight, so tight, as if I was afraid she would disappear if I let her go. "I missed you, Mommy," she whined. "Uncle Mark said you had a headache because you worked too much. Are you better now?" I looked into Lily's round, innocent eyes. She didn't know anything about her father. She didn't know that her father had tried to kill her mother, and I would do anything to protect that innocence for as long as possible. "Mommy's all better now, sweetie, because Lily is here," I replied, kissing her forehead. Mark stood behind Lily, smiling warmly. Their presence gave me a strength that no medicine could provide. Mrs. Hayes could have thousands of netizens and an army of trolls. Ethan could have a slick lawyer, but I had the truth. I had Mark. And most importantly, I had a reason to live. "Lily." "Mark," I called, my voice now much steadier. I wiped the tears from my cheeks. There was no point in crying over the comments of strangers. "Yes, Ave? Contact the best lawyer you know. I'm not backing down. I will drag them all to the hell they created." And about that slanderous video, I looked at the still glowing tablet. "Don't respond now. We'll collect all the hateful comments. I'll sue them all under the Communications Decency Act after Ethan is convicted." Mark grinned, a proud smile. "Now, that's the Dr. Evelyn I know. The predator is awake. The storm of slander outside might still be raging, lightning striking my good name. But inside this room, with my daughter and the man who sincerely protected me, I felt calm. I was ready for the trial. I was ready to face those hypocritical faces. Ethan thought he could destroy me. He was dead wrong. He had just created his worst enemy. The day of the trial arrived with a gray, intense atmosphere, as if the Chicago sky itself felt the heavy burden on my chest. The Cook County Courthouse stood imposing with its large pillars, swarmed by a sea of people. Since Mrs. Hayes's slanderous video went viral, my case was no longer just an ordinary domestic criminal case. It had metamorphosed into a public circus, a spectacle where morality was gambled on the green table of justice. I sat in the back of Dr. Miller's car, wringing my ice-cold hands. Outside, dozens of reporters with cameras ready to fire were swarming like ants on sugar. Flashes went off even before my feet touched the asphalt. "Ready, Ev?" Mark asked, looking back at me through the rearview mirror. His calm eyes provided a little peace in the midst of this storm. "Ready or not, I have to face it, Mark. For Lily." "For myself," I replied, trying to convince myself more than I was convincing him. The moment the car door opened, the chaos erupted. Microphones were aggressively shoved in my face, nearly hitting my nose. "Dr. Reed, what is your response to the cheating allegations from your mother-in-law? Is it true the voice recording is fake and an AI edit? Dr. Miller, what is your actual relationship with the defendant's wife?" The questions were like poisoned arrows, shot relentlessly. I looked down, hiding my face behind dark sunglasses, while Mark and our two lawyers, Mr. Burke and his team, painstakingly carved a path through the crowd. Inside the courtroom, the air felt humid and stuffy, a mixture of cheap perfume, sweat, and old paper. The room was packed. In the front row on the right, I saw the opposition. Mrs. Hayes sat there with her chin held high, dressed in all white with a long, flowing scarf, a stage costume perfectly designed to elicit sympathy from the judges. Her face was lightly made up to make her look pale and suffering, as if she were the victim here. And there, in the defendant's chair, sat Ethan. He wore a conspicuous orange jumpsuit with the number 085 on his chest. His usually neatly styled hair was a bit messy, and there were dark circles under his eyes. But when our gazes met, I saw no remorse. I saw a suppressed flash of anger, an unextinguished arrogance. He stared at me intently and then gave a thin, crooked smile. A smile that sent a terrifying message. "You think you can win against me? All rise." The clerk's voice broke the tension. The judge's gavel struck 3 times, signaling the start of this battle. The prosecuting attorney, a formidable middle-aged woman named Miss Davies, read the indictment in a loud voice. She detailed the chronology of the attempted murder, from the push on the stairs to the neglect while I was in a coma and the attempt to remove the ventilator, which made my skin crawl. However, the real drama began when it was Ethan's defense team's turn. Ethan's lawyer was Mr. Thompson, a portly man with a booming voice and a reputation for doing anything to win for his clients, including twisting the facts. "Your Honor," Thompson's voice echoed off the courtroom walls as he paced confidently. "My client, Mr. Ethan Hayes, is the victim of a malicious plot. His wife, the star witness, Dr. Evelyn Reed, has a history of severe stress due to the pressures of her job as a neurosurgeon. An inhuman workload made her depressed, hallucinatory, and suicidal." I clenched my fists in my lap. "Lies," my heart screamed. "The incident on the stairs," Thompson continued, pointing dramatically at Ethan, "was a failed suicide attempt by Dr. Reed. My client tried to stop her, but it was too late. And as for the ventilator, it was an act of love from a husband who couldn't bear to see his wife suffer as a vegetable. But that good intention was twisted to cover up the witness's affair with her colleague." His finger now pointed at Mark, who was sitting in the gallery. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Some of Mrs. Hayes's supporters whispered loudly, mocking me. "Shameless woman," someone behind me hissed. My turn came to sit in the witness box. My heart pounded as if it would leap out of my chest. I swore on the Bible, my hand trembling violently. Thompson immediately attacked me like a shark smelling blood. "Dr. Reed," he asked with a condescending tone, "is it true you often came home late at night?" "Yes, that's the demand of my profession as a doctor," I answered firmly, trying to keep my voice from shaking. "And is it true you were often alone with Dr. Miller in the break room?" "That's a public space in the hospital. We were discussing patients." Discussing patients? Or planning something? Thompson cut in quickly. Be honest, Dr. Reed. You felt your unemployed husband, Mr. Hayes, was no longer on your level, didn't you? Weren't you ashamed of having an unemployed husband, so you sought comfort in the arms of a more successful man, and then looked for a way to get rid of your husband without having to divorce and split the assets? Objection, Your Honor, Miss Davies shouted. Counsel's question is speculative and corners the witness. I'm just exploring the motive, Your Honor, Thompson countered with a sly smile. I took a deep breath, looking straight into the presiding judge's eyes. Your Honor, I was never ashamed of having a husband who was struggling. What I am ashamed of is having a husband who stole his own child's college fund to gamble and then tried to kill his wife when he got caught. Thompson laughed mockingly. Gambling? Where's the proof? That's just a baseless accusation. We have the proof, Miss Davies interjected calmly. Your Honor, we request permission to play the admissible electronic evidence, a voice recording from the victim's phone just before the incident, hospital security footage, and forensic data from the defendant's laptop. Ethan's previously calm face began to look tense. He whispered frantically to Thompson, but his lawyer could only remain silent as the judge had approved the presentation of evidence. The courtroom fell silent. As the technician played the first audio, a crackling sound filled the room. Then Ethan's voice emerged, clear, cruel, unfiltered. Sign it or die, Evelyn. Sign this asset transfer form now. A loud slap was heard, followed by my muffled groan. If you die, I get the insurance. $5 million, Evelyn. That's more than enough to pay off my gambling debts and live happily with Mom. So, which will it be? Die slowly or sign now? The entire courtroom gasped. The murmur turned into a wave of shock. The faces of the spectators who had been looking at me with disdain now turned pale. The voice was so real, so sadistic, completely contradicting the image of the patient husband Ethan had built on social media. Ethan looked down, his hands gripping his knees. Cold sweat dripped down his temples. That's an AI fabrication, he suddenly shouted, standing up from his chair. She's a smart doctor. She can make anything. Sit down, defendant, the presiding judge barked. If the defendant denies the audio, Miss Davies said with a faint, victorious smile, let's look at the visual evidence. This is a video the victim secretly recorded from a closet while the defendant was on the phone. The video played on a large projector screen. Ethan was seen pacing in our bedroom, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his face furious. Don't worry, boss, my wife is taken care of. The stairs at home are slippery when wet. Just a little push. Done. A domestic accident. The cops won't suspect a thing. The money will come through next week, I promise. Silence. This time, the silence was different. Not a silence of anticipation, but of horror. But our attack wasn't over. Mark and the prosecution team had saved the final bomb to destroy Mrs. Hayes' credibility and the cheating wife motive they had constructed. Your Honor, Miss Davies continued, the defense accuses the victim of having an affair. However, the facts we found from the data recovery of the defendant's laptop show the opposite. We would like to present evidence of bank transfers from the defendant's account to a woman named Cindy Williams, as well as photos of them together. The projector screen changed. A series of bank transfers for thousands of dollars appeared. Money I had worked day and night for. Money that was supposed to be for Lily's future. The total amounted to hundreds of thousands of dollars in the last 6 months. And the most devastating blow was the last photo. Ethan was intimately embracing a young woman in a luxurious apartment. The woman wore a tight dress that accentuated her pregnant belly. Mr. Hayes used the money he extorted from his wife and planned to use her life insurance money to finance another woman who is now carrying his child from an illicit affair, Miss Davies stated firmly. The courtroom erupted. Bastard! A male visitor in the back shouted. But the most horrific reaction came from Mrs. Hayes. The old woman's face was ashen, as if all the blood had been drained from her. Her eyes widened, staring at the projector screen, then at her stepson with a look of disbelief. For Mrs. Hayes, money was God. And seeing the family's money being funneled to another woman was the ultimate betrayal. Ethan, Mrs. Hayes' voice trembled, breaking through the chaos. Is this true? You said the money was for a mining business venture? You said Evelyn was the spendthrift?" Ethan couldn't answer. He bowed his head even lower, his shoulders shaking violently. He knew he was finished. The mask of the devoted son and wronged husband had shattered into pieces in front of his mother, the law, and the entire nation. Thompson wiped his face with a handkerchief, looking frustrated. He knew this case was lost. "Enough!" Ethan suddenly screamed hysterically, his voice breaking like shattered glass. He kicked the table in front of him, sending it toppling over. "Yes, I did it. Are you happy now? It's all because of her." Ethan pointed at me with a trembling finger, his eyes red and wet with tears of anger and despair. "She's stingy. She makes hundreds of thousands, but her husband has to beg like a pauper. I'm the husband, the head of the household. Her money should be my money too. I just wanted to take what was mine. If she died, all the problems would be solved. My debts would be paid, Cindy could live comfortably, and I wouldn't have to listen to her nagging anymore." The screams echoed, bouncing off every corner of the room, recorded by every reporter's camera, and heard by God. It was the most honest and disgusting confession that had ever come out of his mouth. He didn't regret trying to kill me. He only regretted that he had failed. The presiding judge repeatedly banged his gavel to restore order. Security officers immediately subdued the rampaging Ethan, forcing him back into his chair. The rest of the trial was a blur to me. I could only cry silently. Not out of sadness, but from an overwhelming emotional release. Mark, in the gallery, looked at me and nodded slowly, giving me strength. 2 weeks later, the day of the verdict arrived. I stood as the presiding judge read the decision with a deep, authoritative baritone. "This court finds the defendant, Ethan Hayes, guilty of attempted murder, aggravated domestic battery, and fraud. Considering there are no mitigating factors, as the defendant has shown no remorse and has instead slandered the victim." The judge paused, the entire room holding its breath. "The defendant is hereby sentenced to 18 years in prison." 18 years. The gavel struck once, decisively. The sound was the most beautiful music I had ever heard, more melodious than any symphony. Ethan looked limp, as if his bones had been removed from his body. He slumped in his chair, his gaze empty, fixed on the floor. In the front row, Mrs. Hayes fainted and had to be carried out by relatives. The tragic final act of a greedy woman. As the police let him out in handcuffs, Ethan turned to look at me as we passed in the corridor. There was no more arrogance in his eyes, only fear and a dark emptiness. He had lost everything, his freedom, his money, his mistress, who I heard had fled with the remaining jewelry after learning of his arrest, and his pride. I looked at him straight on, without pity, without fear. "Enjoy your harvest, Ethan," I whispered, softly enough for him to hear. Ethan was dragged away, disappearing behind the door of the court's holding cell. I stepped out of the building. The sun outside was shining brightly, breaking through the gray clouds that had been hanging overhead. The polluted Chicago air felt so fresh in my lungs. The storm had passed. The predator was caged, and I was free. The first morning after the verdict felt strange. I woke up as the morning sun broke through a gap in the bedroom curtains, dazzling my eyes. For a few seconds, panic seized me. My heart raced. My hand fumbled on the other side of the bed, afraid to find Ethan's figure there, afraid to smell his cigarette smoke, afraid to hear his yelling. But that side of the bed was empty, cold and silent. Slowly, reality seeped into my consciousness. Ethan was gone. He was in a state penitentiary, sleeping on a cold concrete floor. Not this king-sized bed. I let out a long breath, feeling the oxygen fill my lungs without the tightness of fear. But victory in court didn't mean instant healing. My physical wounds may have healed, the stitches on my head had fused with my skin, but the wound in my soul was still wide open. For the first month, I often woke up in the middle of the night in a cold sweat, hearing footsteps on the stairs or dreaming of being pushed into a dark abyss. I still felt like I was being watched. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days when I felt incredibly strong, like I could conquer the world. But there were other days when I could only curl up under the covers, crying for no reason, feeling dirty and stupid for having loved a monster like Ethan for so many years. Why didn't I realize it sooner, Mark? I asked one afternoon during an informal therapy session with him at a quiet cafe. I'm a doctor. I'm supposed to be good at diagnosing, but why was I so blind to the sickness in my own marriage? Mark stirred his coffee slowly, looking at me with patience. He never judged me. Because you loved him sincerely, Ev. And manipulators like Ethan are experts at hiding the symptoms. Don't blame the victim. He was the one who was sick, not you. My first big step toward healing was leaving that luxurious house. The house that had witnessed every slap, every insult, and every tear. I sold it. I didn't care about the fake happy memories that once existed there. I used the money from the sale to pay off the remaining debts Ethan had created in my name, to be truly clean, and used the rest to buy a modest house in a quiet suburb of Chicago. My new house was much smaller, a single-story home with a large lawn and a maple tree in the front. But this house had something Ethan's palace didn't: peace. Its walls held no memories of screams. Its tiles were never stained with my blood. It was a blank canvas. Here, I began to piece my life back together with Lily. Lily, my now 6-year-old daughter, was my biggest reason to keep going. The trauma had left its mark on her. She had become a quiet child, afraid of loud noises, but slowly, her cheerful laughter began to return. "Mommy, look!" "A butterfly," she shouted one morning, running barefoot on the lawn. Seeing her laugh so freely warmed my heart. We were safe now. A year passed. I decided not to return to full-time work at the elite hospital where I used to be. Too many pitying glances, too many whispers in the hallways made me uncomfortable. Instead, I used my remaining savings and part of the restitution money the court had managed to seize from Ethan's hidden assets to realize a long-buried dream. I rented a 2-story storefront not far from my new home. In front, a simple yet meaningful sign was installed: the Phoenix Foundation, Counseling, and Medical Aid for Victims of Domestic Violence. This wasn't just a workplace. It was a monument to my resistance. I recruited Nurse Sarah as the operational manager. My loyal friend immediately resigned from the hospital when I offered her the position. We collaborated with several pro bono lawyers and psychologists. It wasn't easy at first. Many looked down on us. Why would a specialist doctor start a nonprofit? There's no money in it, some of my former colleagues sneered, but I didn't care. The inner satisfaction of seeing a woman bravely report her abusive husband, or seeing a child sleep soundly without fear of being hit, was far more valuable than the large salary I used to receive only to hand over to Ethan. One of my first clients was a young mother named Jessica. She came in with a bruised face, just like I used to. She cried, saying her husband was a respected man in the community and she was afraid no one would believe her. I held her hand, looking deep into her eyes. "I believe you, Jessica. The world might turn a blind eye, but here, you are heard. We will fight this. I will stand with you." When Jessica finally won custody of her child and was free from her husband 3 months later, her hug felt more healing than any therapy I had ever undergone. I realized that by healing others, I was slowly healing myself. And in the midst of my new busy life, there was one person who was always consistently present, calm like a harbor, patiently waiting for a ship caught in a storm: Dr. Miller. He never pushed, never declared his love with grand gestures or overly sweet words. He was present in small things, bringing Lily's favorite donuts on weekends, fixing a leaky faucet at the foundation, sitting with me in silence on the porch when I was tired. One evening, it was raining heavily. We were sitting in my living room. Lily was fast asleep in her room. Mark had just finished helping me draft a grant proposal for the foundation. "Aren't you tired, Mark?" I asked suddenly, breaking the silence filled with the sound of rain. Going back and forth from the city, taking care of a traumatized single mother, Mark put down his pen. He looked at me, that calm gaze that always made my heart flutter. "Ev, I'm never tired if the destination is you. I've waited for years to see you happy, to see you smile freely like you do now. That's more than enough payment for the gas money." My eyes welled up. I remembered Ethan, who always calculated the profit and loss in our relationship, who always demanded to be served. And now, In front of me was a man who gave without asking, who loved without conditions. I'm still broken, Mark, I whispered, my voice trembling. I'm afraid to start over. I'm afraid of making the wrong choice again. Mark shifted closer but still maintained a respectful distance. He didn't touch me, but his presence felt so near. You're not broken, Evelyn. You're renovating, and I'm a patient construction worker. I'm not asking you to marry me tomorrow or next month. I'm just asking for permission to stay here, to be with you until the renovation is complete. My tears fell, not tears of sadness, but of overwhelming emotion. I nodded slowly. Don't go, Mark. Mark smiled, a sincere smile that reached his eyes. I'm not going anywhere. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. Our lives moved to a new, peaceful rhythm. I heard news about Ethan from my former lawyer. In prison, Ethan became an easy target for other inmates without money to bribe the guards. And with his status as a husband who tried to kill his wife, he was at the bottom of the hierarchy. He was often sick, rail-thin, and looked much older than his age. His mother, Mrs. Hayes, went bankrupt and was now living with distant relatives in a small town, ignored by the socialites she once adored. Karma was real. It came not with an explosive vengeance, but with a cold, quiet justice. I no longer hated them. Hatred was exhausting. I just felt pity. And then, I forgot about them. They were just a closed chapter of my past. That afternoon, I was sitting on the foundation's porch after all the staff had gone home. The evening sky was a golden orange, painting the horizon with colors of hope. Lily was drawing at a small table beside me. She drew 3 people, me, Lily, and a tall man with glasses holding our hands. Is this Uncle Mark? I asked, stroking her hair. Lily nodded enthusiastically. Yes. When is Uncle Mark going to be my daddy? My friends at school get picked up by their daddies. I want that too. I chuckled and looked towards the gate. Mark's car had just pulled into the driveway. He got out, waving with his signature wide smile, holding a bag of donuts. The evening sun shone on his back, making him seem to glow. I took out my phone and turned on the front camera, not to record evidence of a crime like I once did in locker 303. This time, I wanted to record happiness. I wanted to share the story that even after the darkest night, the sun will always rise again. Hello, everyone. I greeted the camera with a perfect, blooming smile. Thank you for joining me on my long journey from rock bottom to today. Locker 303 held a dark secret that almost ended my life. But from that darkness, I learned to light my own candle. Now, the storm has passed. And for those of you who might be in the same position I was in, please don't give up. You are valuable, you are strong, and believe me, happiness is waiting for you at the end of the road. I pointed the camera at Lily, who was running to hug Mark. That scene, my daughter and the man who loved her like his own, was the most beautiful sight I had ever seen. My life was no longer a tragedy. It was a story of victory,